Well, welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. How many times must we learn the same lesson over and over and over again? And how many times must millions of people die as a consequence? We are not all the same, and we are not all gifted in the same way. In fact, some of us aren't gifted at all, other than just making the rest of us miserable. That's just the reality of life, which the liberals and the left continue to deny and imperil the rest of us. They want to destroy exceptionalism. Some have the ability to be doctors and lawyers, and others are only capable of more menial and repetitive tasks. Why? Because the liberal leftist Democrats mostly fall into the inept class, yet rule by default. That is, you're not doing what you need to do to keep them out of government and positions of authority. Now, another hard truth and reality of life is that we all don't have the same length of time. My mother lived to be 73, my father 93. So folks, it's time to grow up and stop being psychotic, which means being detached from reality. The sooner we embrace the reality that we are all on death row, we will all be so much better off because our decisions will be reality-based. We have a short time here, so we better get it right. Now, another harsh reality is that some of us live in a deep resentment and hate for others and develop schemes and means to cheat the system so they can become the overlords of others. Yet the systems they repeatedly implement will collapse and the whole of society will decline. It is the cannots and the have-nots that outnumber the class who have the intellectual capacity to advance society, to make things work. But it is also that class, including the managerial class, that deny the danger that comes from doing nothing. Metaphorically, like when the 2-year-old wants the keys to your car. You exercise your authority and say no. But we haven't been doing that with the people who are the least capable of governing society. Psychological studies have already analyzed the left and the liberals and the socialists, all peas in a pod, all in the same pod, and it's not good. Half have mental issues and suffer all sorts of depressive ills, resentment, self-loathing, and find some gratification in false sanctification in protest, like you just saw in the All Kings, No Kings protest. I mean, dressed up as frogs and furries and dyed colored hair and some of the most absolutely almost non-human looking people you ever saw doing the craziest things, screaming and yelling. Unfortunately, some of those are teachers teaching your kids. They are so angry and impotent that they simply want to burn down the whole world. They are like the child having a tantrum. Ask them a question as to why they are protesting, and they instantly get triggered and verge on violence because they can't answer your question. They find it a threat to their attempts to validate themselves. And you know this, you've seen it all on TV, how crazy these people are. But you put up with them. We toxically tolerate it. So how could this all happen in the great numbers there are? Well, as I wrote in my book, America's Systemic Psychosis, wherein I deal with the issue of detachment from reality, and my main premise being that it is inorganic, that is, it's not naturally occurring, but rather imposed, created, and indoctrinated mainly through our schools and media, the likes of Soros and the billionaire Chinese American who lives in China and finances the protests that we are seeing on the streets. Why we haven't done something about that, I don't know, but you better be asking your members of Congress. You know, they're a bunch of do-nothings anyway. It's not naturally occurring, folks. The things that are happening are not naturally happening. They are implemented. It's intentional. And we must go after the instigators, and no punishment is too harsh given the lives that they are destroying. Now, let's look at some of the realities that are destroying civilized society. All cultures are not the same, and some are not compatible, nor can they coexist. And the first and most prominent one is Islam. This is 500 years old, folks. Why are we just learning this? A majority of the Islamic countries, due to inbreeding and incest, have an IQ of 80 or lower. They have evolved into and are controlled by an ideology, but call it a religion to give it a greater status. Any simple reading of the Quran or the Hadith will reveal the fanaticism of what they call a religion. However, the destroyers of society, particularly the civilized society, we see at work in the Democrat Party and in all their mercenary ways. They deny these realities, impose measures upon the rest of us, cloaking it in fake compassion, when all it is a scheme to maintain and consolidate power that they don't deserve and can't control. They need fame, the validation that they so desire, even though they're kind of like the 2-year-old, again, wanting the keys to the car. That will surely be wrecked. They are willing and have proven that they must destroy society to just survive another day. Yes, that's delusional, but that is who they are, and the facts support it. That is just how mentally ill they are, and the empirical evidence supports it, as I have documented in over 300 articles that I've published, 2 books, and 70 podcasts. And that's just me. There are the media and the libraries and the social media is just littered with examples of this. Here's an example in all the countries in Europe that are being destroyed by Islam. France, Germany, Italy, and England, as well as Spain. The governmental statistics show that between 85 and 90% of all the terroristic and criminal activity is committed by Muslims. But they want to import more of them. Let more immigrate into those countries, and it's destroying those countries. Moreover, as in the United States, over half of the immigrants, get this, is on welfare. Therein lies your affordability problem, but the Democrats pick that up and they want to blame Trump and everybody else that's not responsible, and they don't place the blame where it should be. There is your affordability problem. You're allowing these immigrants to be flooded into the country, and you, and many of you, probably voted for it when you voted for Biden and every Democrat. How stupid is that? You are paying welfare for the world. But the Democrats are delighted, as the immigrants are the Democrats' voter base. The treasonous Democrats are replacing Americans. Now, we are no longer vetting migrants as we used to. In the past, migrants to this country had to have something to offer and demonstrate that they can sustain themselves. However, today, American taxpayers are having to pay that bill. So many of those who are too incompetent to really be casting an intelligent vote are so cognitively impaired, they don't see the connection between the welfare being paid to illegal migrants and their problem with affordability. The destroyers of society in this country that have now taken over the Democrat Party are of the same mentality and political persuasion in other countries, and are quite adept at selling their false narratives and fake compassion to the mentally challenged. It is they who keep the likes of the Democrats in power, who only exacerbate the very problem that the lower classes continue to complain about, such as, again, for affordability. The lack of affordability, or the unaffordability they suffer, is of their own making, folks. I don't have any compassion for that, and I don't care, really. They've earned it and they deserve it because they've done it again and again and again. You can make one mistake, but if you keep making it time and time again, it's on you. Now, as the Lord said, the poor will always be amongst us, and there is good reason why. The poor are not the poor just because of the rich, although there is some blame there too. But some are poor because of corrupt politicians like we see in the Democrat Party and in the authoritarian left, who deceive the poor with empty words and promises, knowing that they will always have the poor's vote. And then many are poor because of their own corruption, greed, or sin. They are the pawns of life, and when armed with the power of the vote, it's again like giving the 2-year-old the keys to the car. Just as you have to pass a test to drive a car, if you're going to vote or have the right to vote, you need to know what you're doing, and therein lies the weakness of our democracy. And with that, you can see how evil and wicked are those in the Democrat Party. They prey upon the ignorant masses. That's their base, and that's why they spew out all their empty promises. And remember, the old saying goes, anyone that promises you everything, which is the Democrats, are sure to deliver you nothing. Now, this is all the more reason why the rest of us must be focused upon purging those types from the levers of power if we hope to save our society. The statistics don't lie, and as I have just given you 2 examples, society is being impacted and destroyed more and more each day as we delay in taking bold and decisive action that is needed to correct our errors of the recent past. Now, here's another example for you as to the rot and danger that we have in our political class, particularly the Democrats. In a recent act that was just passed in Congress to protect animals and to deport those migrants who harm animals and don't want them or don't want you to have them as pets in your house, 190 Democrats voted against the act. Fortunately, it passed. But once again, the Democrats were catering to a culture that, if they were in the majority, would outlaw you from having a pet in your house. Here's another example of how people are too stupid to connect the dots. So many of the animal rights groups and shelters vote Democrat, yet it was under President Trump in his first term who supported and got passed a law that made it a crime to abuse an animal. Talk about biting the hand that feeds you. This is but a very small example of what's happening on a more macro scale across this country. It's an epidemic of cognitive dissonance. Now, I have very little compassion for those whose suffering is of their own making. Even in situations where I'm not dealing with a liberal leftist schemer, when someone comes up to me complaining about what the liberals are doing, before I allow them to take up my time, I ask them, well, who'd you vote for? I'm not going to let them waste my time when it's clear that they are the source of the problem. And as I have said before, there is no left and right in this country. There is only left, and then there's the rest of us. But the problem is, too many of the rest of us are sitting around complaining and doing nothing, like the complainers who want to take up my time yet do the very thing that's causing the problems. Well, here's a little ray of sunshine to switch topics for a minute. The president of Costa Rica, Rodrigo Chavez Robles, announced on Wednesday that his country would cut all diplomatic ties with Cuba, shutting down its embassy in Havana and ordering all Cuban diplomats out of his country. The president asserted, "We have to clean the hemisphere of communists," that is, the Western hemisphere of communists. Amen to that, and that should have been an amen 50 or 60 years ago. Folks, we should have outlawed communism and socialism 100 years ago. What we're suffering today is of our own making. And as I have said on many occasions, we allowed it to spread, and we allowed it to spread in the Western Hemisphere. This was against the Monroe Doctrine. We should have taken out Castro when we had the chance, and instead he spread that disease to Nicaragua, Central America, Venezuela, and South America. Fortunately, there is a conservative wave sweeping of South America right now, and I hope it continues, but the Costa Rican president is taking the very actions that we should have taken around the world long ago, and hundreds of millions of people would have been spared. Hundreds of millions of people would be alive today, but for our indolence. Now, there is a hot place in hell for those who take up the mantle of authority, abuse it, misuse it, or even fail in the proper exercise of it, resulting in the massive deaths that we have witnessed in just our lifetimes. There is no debate, and the facts and evidence are so compelling after the murder and deaths of over 120 million people in the last 100 years that communism has caused. Communism is a scourge upon this earth, and it must be outlawed, including any organization in this country that attempts to propagate it. This is not a free speech issue, folks, and you saw communist flags flying around all of these protests in just the last week. This has to be outlawed. This is an existential fight, and you really have to squash this and push this down. We basically, back in the 40s and the 50s, right after the World War II, we had a surge of socialism and communism in this country, and we wiped it out. But now its ugly head has been reared up again, and we've got to stop it. Now, moving on, I couldn't be happier right now because the mentally ill people of New York are getting exactly what they deserve. The biggest terrorist attack in this country occurred 25 years ago by Muslims. And then, 25 years later, what did they do last year? They elected a Muslim communist as their mayor. Now he's going to tax them to death, and people are fleeing. Now, it is revealed that his wife, this is just a new revelation, through her social media, has a love for the terrorists and the use of the N-word Oh my goodness, this guy who accuses everybody else of being a racist, yet his own wife loves using the N-word. Come on, folks, wake up. She hates the Jews, and the Jews make up a large part of the population in New York. But they are what I call the suicidal Jews because they are radically left in the way they vote, and it is exactly that part of the political spectrum that would gas them all over again. So they got what they deserved in Mondami, and now the city is going bankrupt. The icing on this cake is what Governor Hochul of New York just did. She started begging the people who she chased out of New York and who moved to Palm Beach, Florida, to come back. She's now begging. She told them to get out because they weren't of their value system. Now, just a year later, she's begging them to come back because the state and the city's going bankrupt. Now, think about that. How stupid is that? Seriously, if you've got a brain in your head, why in the world would you ever move back only to pay exorbitantly higher taxes and social programs for immigrants that will defraud the system like they did in Minneapolis to the tune of billions of dollars, and you get nothing for it? Frankly, folks, you can't fix stupid, and as far as I'm concerned, New York City could slide off into the Atlantic as well as California into the Pacific, and we as a nation would be better off for it. So the best thing that you can do is keep your states as red politically as you can and purge them of any liberal or leftist influence because they are nothing but a resentful, hateful, and maniacal group of people who will never get it right, who belong in an institution and will only harm you if they get into power. Now, you have the power to live a good, healthy, and prosperous life, but you can't do it with a liberal, leftist, socialist, or communist. They are all synonymous of each other. All those descriptions, all those adjectives, they are all synonymous of each other. They all believe that they can sanctify themselves from the flames of perdition with their fake compassion that they have no intention of paying for by themselves because they're going to force it upon you. If you fall for their baloney, then you deserve the suffering that will come your way. If you don't believe it, just ask the hundreds of thousands and millions that have left New York, Illinois, and California in the last 10 years. Now, here's an I told you so moment. Iran has now declared that the world is its target and said that recreational and tourist sites worldwide would now be a target for its aggression. And what's left of their leadership states that they are still building missiles. Now, did you hear that? Just last week, those miserable, anti-God, anti-American, hedonistic, reprobate Democrats claimed there was no urgency to this war. The Iranians are saying just the opposite, and proving the Democrats such hypocrites. What we have seen in just the last 3 weeks has proven not only the necessity of the actions that we have taken in Iran, but also who our domestic enemies are. They are in Congress, and they go by the name of Democrat. So for normal people in this country, remember, there is only the left and then the rest of us. It's time for you to do something and do some spring cleaning. And I mean the kind of spring cleaning where you purge yourself of all the associations you have, whether personal or financially, of those who support the Democrat left. It's the actions and demented thinking of the Democrats that was about to land us in another world war, and your young sons and daughters were going to pay for it and pay the price on a foreign battlefield. Now, doing these podcasts aren't easy, and there's a lot of other things I could be doing. But I know for sure that one thing that I am doing is that in telling you the truth and informing you of what's going on is and will heap hot coals upon you if you hear the truth and do not heed it. There's no sense that the rest of us should suffer because of the inane stupidity of others that places us in the situation we're in right now. And if we don't wake up, it will be irretractable. Now, let me give you a personal anecdote of how I take action every day and in any given situation. Years ago, I was at a small birthday gathering, and we were all seated at a large round table at a restaurant. Now, my conservative friend, whose birthday was being celebrated, had me seated next to her sister, who at the time that I didn't know was a real liberal. And as is typical of most liberals, they can't keep politics and their opinions out of the conversation. They always like to shove it in your face. Well, she was giving the typical leftist spiel and fake compassion and how taxes needed to be raised and the unconstitutionality of what Trump was doing in lowering taxes and so forth in his first administration. And of course, she was a teacher whose husband was a financial advisor. My friend knows, the friend that was having the birthday knows that I don't allow lies to go on unchallenged regardless of the venue. And I didn't. I lit into her sister and pointed out how factually wrong she was. And when she got into constitutional issues and said she knew more about the Constitution, I bluntly told her that she didn't know what she was talking about because I was an attorney who had practiced that for over 30 years. I knew what I was talking about, and then I looked down at the table near her place setting only to see her Mercedes-Benz key fob. And I pointed out, well, how hypocritical it was that here she is spewing this liberal crap, and she's one of the 1% preaching how everyone else should be taxed, yet she was driving around in a Mercedes. Then came the bomb, whereupon I asked her, well, what does your husband's financial clients think? What do they think about his political stance and your stance? And what would they think about them and her husband supporting people like Obama and being okay to tax the money that he is supposed to be making for them? When that happened, suddenly she realized that her husband's clients would flee if they knew that their advisor was undermining their very interest with who he was supporting politically. And she looked at her sister and said, well, do we really want to keep talking about this? To which her sister said, oh, by all means, yes, I'm enjoying this. And with that, her sister grabs her key fob and leaves. Now, I don't like those types of confrontations, but you see, folks, you have to be ready to confront the lie when it pops up. And the liberal and the leftist can never keep their mouths shut. They are always indoctrinating and always spreading the lie. They'll take any opportunity and grab any opportunity, no matter how inappropriate. And you have to learn the art and skill of confrontation. If you don't, you'll just be overrun by the liberals and the Democrats who will gladly tell you how you're going to live your life and how much you're going to pay to do it. Now, here's another hot topic in the news today, and that is the scourge of Islam. The Islam religion, which is really not a religion, made the most obvious false prophet in history with Muhammad. Now, you've heard all about this, but you haven't really dug deep, and you really don't have to dig very deep to find out what a fraud it is. But they picked the most obvious false prophet in history with Muhammad when they could have made Muhammad sound like absolutely anything they wanted. They came about 600 or 700 years after Christianity. He could have been the most reliable, most trustworthy, most miraculous person to ever walk the planet. Instead, these demons from hell came up with a guy who even said he thought he was demon-possessed and repeatedly tried to commit suicide. Yeah, that's their Muhammad. And who they named most of their children after? He had revelations from Satan and was a victim of magic and delivered false prophecies, accepted a meal prepared by a woman whose family he had just slaughtered, and died like a poisoned rat in being completely exposed as a false prophet. Quickly here, remember Muhammad was illiterate, a criminal, and chased out of his home. Never created any miracles, never raised anyone from the dead, and is declared a false prophet in their own holy book, the Quran itself. Now, with that, let's continue. When we look at the sources, we learned that the prophet married more women and girls than his own revelations allowed him to marry. Then Muhammad lusted after the wife of his adopted son, causing divorce by lusting after her. But this demon of a man that the Islamists worship also loved doing unseemly things with little boys. Then this illiterate that couldn't read and never created miracles died exactly the way the Quran said he would die if he was a false prophet. As a prophet could not be poisoned, but he was, by the Jewish woman who offered to cook him a meal. And Muhammad let her do that and took that meal, and he died as a result. But he allowed her to cook the meal after he had just slaughtered her family. Now, how stupid is that? Some of these stories are just so inane. I just can't believe that anybody that is cognitive enough to put one foot in front of the other could believe something like that. How about the story of Muhammad and his adopted son's wife? He sees her practically naked, and then the adopted son divorces her so that Muhammad can have her. Muhammad caused a big scandal among the people who were really, really, really upset about this because they thought it was at the level of incest. To shorten this story a bit, Muhammad abolished adoption to make it so that his adopted son was never his adopted son, and it didn't count for incest after the fact, in order to justify what Muhammad did in taking his son's wife. Muhammad did much more, but here's the point. Muhammad was the worst possible person anyone could ever use with all the crimes he committed to portray him as your prophet, particularly someone who couldn't tell the difference between a revelation from God and a revelation from Satan. Folks, this is what you're dealing with in Islam. It is not a religion. It is a political ideology, a scam hiding behind the claim of a religion. The Democrats and the leftists do that today, trying to make government your religion. You must wake up to the dangers of Islam and Muslims, as well as the Democrats, who are no different in wanting to make government your God. We have been through this with Islam for over 500 years. It's time to wake up. Okay, let's switch to a new topic here. Well, here we go again. And particularly for the people of Kentucky who should be ashamed if they voted for Governor Andy Beshear. And why is that? Well, for many reasons, but the most recent is because he visited the hometown of Vice President Vance in Ohio to attack the vice president, saying that Vance was conceited. Well, that's a strange and stupid thing to say, or even word to use. Well, Mr. Beshear, that sounds more like resentment than it does fact. You use Kentucky taxpayers' money to travel to Ohio to lie and say that Vance is conceited. Beshear couldn't point to any fact when he said that in such a derisive way, and he can't today. There is one fact that we do know, and that is Beshear is no Christian because he is a pathological liar, and all of his lies can be categorized, documented, and are on the record, and I have recorded some of them in other podcasts and writings. Folks, don't let Beshear Jimmy Carter you. This is exactly what Carter did in the 70s to fool so many Christians, naive Christians. Beshear is so hungry for power that if this was an Olympic sport, he would win in the category of being a social climber and living in his own self-absorbed obsession and glory of being a legend in his own mind. Let me warn the nation, he, as Kentucky's governor, has not accomplished anything. Everything Beshear boasts about, the Republican Party supermajority in the legislature overrode 99.9% of the time and overrode his vetoes, which exceeds all of the overridden vetoes of all of Kentucky's past governors combined. So this little boy governor, Beshear, runs to Ohio to try to cut the feet out from under Vance, who he sees as a potential contender. So he wants to do in Vance early. Beshear seems to revel in the delusion that somehow he is Vance's equal. How amazing is that? You better look into the record. Let me remind you of something, Mr. Beshear. You haven't the education that Mr. Vance has. And Vance at least had the smarts to write a #1 best-selling book that was turned into a #1 movie. He served his country overseas, and he's a stellar speaker in his engagements, and he is a true Christian because he doesn't need to lie like you do to maintain any relevance. Beshear falsely claimed that Vance was demeaning and disrespectful to hillbillies. Well, Mr. Beshear, if you are at the reading level that you should be and read his book, you would know that's not the case, but then you don't care about the truth. You just want to gain some votes from Eastern Kentucky and mislead everybody else. But you have no care or concern about those in Eastern Kentucky because they are not of your people. Here's a picture of Beshear's people, and get a good look at this and zoom in on this. See, he's just like all the other radical Democrats. He has deceived Kentucky, and if there was any way that we could sue you for criminal fraud, I would gladly come out of litigation retirement and help prosecute the case against you. You are a Nancy Pelosi, Biden, and Kamala Harris radical, and your statements and political positions of the past prove it. You can fool the women with your smile, but at the end of the day, you're still a reprobate, and I'm not just using that term just to be bombastic, but in fact and to be factual. You have a record that proves me right. I will also remind the country that Beshear initially won the governorship by a squeaker of 5,500 votes. If people were only informed today as to who he really is, they'd be demanding his impeachment. And in fact, they were thinking about it in his first term. Now, Beshear is running around the country in hopes of running for president, where he can tell as many lies as he wants because people in other states and around the country don't know him as well as we do here in Kentucky and won't take the time to find out. But there are enough people in Kentucky that know who he is, and when they really get to know him, they despise him. They would have never voted for him in the first place. Beshear is just another fraud, along with all the other Democrats, such as Governor Spanberg, for example, of Virginia, who campaigned as a moderate, only to instantly change upon her taking her oath. Democrats are no more devoted to the truth than these Islamists are in Iran that we just talked about. Now Governor Beshear wants to use the old Jimmy Carter playbook to pretend to be a moderate and to tout his fake Christianity to play upon the naivety of so many Christians, or at least those who think they are. Well, those who fell for Jimmy Carter's lies paid the price with double-digit inflation and unemployment, and 21% interest rates. That's why I couldn't get a house when I wanted to, because who can afford 21% interest rates? But that was another Democrat that did you in. Those who voted for Carter deserved their suffering, and the only reason that the people of Kentucky have not suffered under Beshear is because of the supermajority that the Republicans have in the legislature. I, for one, knew how wicked he was and helped draw up the legislative plans to neuter him as a governor that made him a lame duck governor. The benefits that Kentuckians are enjoying today did not come from him. They came from the Republican legislature, who overrode his vetoes of legislation that he is now trying to take credit for. There's nothing righteous or virtuous about Beshear. And again, the mainstream media in the nation is trying to make him out to be a moderate, just like they did Spanberger in Virginia, and now the people are suffering for it. And again, the record reflects it. It's not what he says that counts, it's what he does and what he supports, and it's reprehensible. There is not a dime's worth of difference between Beshear and all the other radical Democrats in the country. Now, Beshear is counting on attracting the female vote, but that's unfortunately the nature of too many women, particularly as we saw with the murder of Mangione in New York, who executed that healthcare executor in New York City in cold blood. And the women were practically swooning over him. If you make the criminal attractive enough, even if they have committed rape, there are too many women out there who will forgive them and go for the bad boy. I've seen it too many times in my profession, both legally and politically, and it's nauseating and disgusting. Let me give you this little aside. No Democrat would have won the presidency after JFK but for the women vote. Okay, moving on. So to my listeners in other states, and particularly in Kentucky, if you want to know more about the fraudster we allowed into the governor's mansion in Kentucky, that is Governor Beshear, then please contact me or the Republican Party of Kentucky. And if you're a Kentucky citizen who wants to engage in the education project of letting other people around the country know exactly who Beshear is, then help will be welcomed, but it is also needed. So to Governor Beshear, stop gallivanting around the country and at least try to earn some of your pay for the short time that you have left as governor, even though you haven't been one, as you are about as effective as the auto-pen president that we had in Biden. Now, let me update you from my last podcast regarding Senator Rand Paul. You see, I'm an equal opportunity criticizer. I go after the inane, wicked, evil Democrats, and I also take on the Republicans. Well, here's an update on my last podcast regarding Rand Paul's inappropriate conduct in the confirmation hearings of Senator Mullen for Director of Homeland Security. Reviewing comments from coast to coast, Senator Paul was pummeled, ridiculed, and castigated. I haven't read one favorable comment yet about his conduct in the confirmation hearings of Mullen. This goes to show how inappropriate it was for him to abuse his position as chairman of the committee he chairs to make it all about himself and not conducting the hearing in a fair and impartial fashion as chairman. What he said was not well thought out. As I weighed in on the situation the following day, Ryan has got to get a grip on himself and start being a team player with the rest of the Republican Party and start supporting the president, or he's going to find himself primaried and out of office. But here's a little warning, and here's the most recent update. He's looking at a run for president in 2028. So just put that in your cap and think about it. Well, let's talk about another of the Democrat traitors in our Senate. And this is a traitor to the American people who should have been indicted and placed on trial when he helped to keep Abrego Garcia, that MS-13 member, wife beater, and illegal alien in our country. In fact, this traitor traveled to El Salvador to talk to Garcia in prison, and we all saw him sipping margaritas with this Garcia guy. This is Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, who is one of the most radical leftists and frauds in the United States Senate, who recently, on one of the only stations that he'll appear on because he couldn't tolerate the intense cross-examination elsewhere, he lied and lied about the situation in Iran. And this is what he said to host Katie Hunt, referring to the Iranian conflict. "You say it's an illegal war," she said. "You also posted this today. Let's be clear, targeting civilian infrastructure is a war crime under international law. The world has called out Russia for doing exactly this in Ukraine. If Trump and Hegseth follow Putin's playbook, they must be held accountable." Now, you were talking about targeting Iran's power grid. So if the president goes through with this, would that be an appropriate sanction? Now, that was the question from the moderator. And Van Hollen said, well, that would be a war crime if the president just goes and targets Iran's infrastructure, civilian infrastructure. There are very narrow circumstances where a country can target infrastructure for military purposes. But the president has said, unless you open the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to blow up your civilian infrastructure, which is clearly a violation of international law. And so the president should be held accountable in international tribunals or in the United States. So even in the midst of this conflict against the world's #1 sponsor of terrorism, having killed thousands of Americans, Van Hollen and the rest of the Democrat Party are hoping for failure in this exercise in Iran, wanting our president to be charged with war crimes. Moreover, Van Hollen speaks of an international law that doesn't exist in the way that he speaks of it. But this just goes to show you how wretched he is. This man is a traitor. He wants to stop a president from ridding the world of the #1 nation that sponsors terrorism and responsible for deaths all around the world, including thousands of Americans. Why would somebody ever be allowed like that in the Senate? Because of the cowardice of so many people like Van Hollen, the Iranian regime built up a huge military stockpile of missiles that we now discovered have the range of reaching every capital city in Europe. And they were just weeks away from having enough nuclear material for 10 nuclear bombs. Folks, we have to get rid of people like Van Hollen out of the government because they are a danger to your life. So do Americans, I guess the next topic would be, do Americans really deserve good government? Well, here's my response, and here's why we don't. For example, we have a president who has practically taken out the world's #1 sponsor of terror, who is undermining Western civilization and has been doing that for 47 years. And you can thank Jimmy Carter for that, as he burns in hell because he created Iran, as well as a lot of things that most of you don't even know about. Don't forget that, and many naive Christians put Carter in office. Just 3 weeks into the mission to remove the world's #1 terror sponsor, in just a short period of time, the leftist media have turned the American people against the operation. Shame on those whose opinions can flip-flop that quickly. Do you think that World War II was taken care of in 3 weeks. We don't need them and those type of people in our life. They should be ashamed of themselves, just as you would be any ungrateful child. Now, here's another example of the disgusting nature of many Americans who are those people who should not have any right to vote. You've all seen it on TV where so many can't answer the most basic questions. Another example is those who blame the Republicans for the government shutdown when it is abundantly clear that beyond debate that the Democrats are keeping the government closed, placing Americans at risk because they've shut down the Department of Homeland Security and forced TSA agents to go without pay. Let me make this as clear as possible, and this is how you can test friends, family, and your associations from which you may want to disassociate and purge from your list of relationships. And that is, there are 53 Republicans. Maybe some of these people out there in the country got lost in their math, the new math, as they called it back then. There are 53 Republicans in the Senate. Folks across the country and in all the other states where you get my podcast, it takes 60 votes to open the government back up. So what does that mean? Let's do some simple math. That means that at least 7 Democrats have to vote with Republicans to reopen the government. But you want to blame the Republicans for the shutdown? They've voted everything that they've got, but it's the Democrats that are keeping the government shut down. The Democrats have unanimously voted against reopening the government, and they're making people go without a paycheck. Again, the solution to so many of America's problems is good guys doing nothing. Good guys not making the strong, courageous stance to remove those people from their lives who cannot recognize the truth and always side with what is evil. They are the people who are ungrateful and who are cognitively dissonant. That they will always vote against what is not only in theirs, but the nation's best interest. Why enable them with your association? You've got to start yoking yourself with people who are equally yoked with you. Think about this for a minute. You have those people who are bad actors and are always making the wrong choices, but there's seldom any consequences for them in their personal lives because so many common sense good people seem to be so needy for the attention of wicked people. Why? I have no sympathy for those who suffer when their suffering is self-imposed. And that goes for the good guys if the good guys are always enabling the bad guys. The answer is simple, and the answer is clear. It is pure insanity when I see competent people making the right decisions and implementing the right solutions to problems only to be kicked out before the job is done. There is so many biblical parallels, it's astounding. Just like when God sent the prophets, what did the Israelites do? They killed them. And then God passed judgment upon them, and that's exactly what we're in and what we may deserve here in America. So my action plan for you would be to stop enabling those who are causing our problems, and that is those who support the radical left that has taken over and operates under the name of the Democrat Party. Too many of us are the root that feeds the evil that goes on in this country. When I leave this world, it will be a sweet parting, as I will know that my labors in spreading the truth have been for the benefit of others, for this is not a money-making proposition for me, but rather a very costly one. And in parting, I will take solace knowing that so much of the suffering to come will have been earned and just. So act now and do what may be uncomfortable for you now, or suffer the consequences. Now, one last item here is treat them as traitors. Folks, we don't need a trial court to tell us that what the Democrats did is treasonous with the latest shutdown of the government for the purposes of keeping illegal aliens and criminals in this country so they could vote for Democrats. Likewise, every American-loving citizen should treat the Democrats as the traitors they are. Backing this up is Democrat opposition to voter ID. Think about that. They are telling you in the clearest terms that they are going to cheat as they always have. Nearly 90% of Americans support voter ID. The Democrats can't win elections without cheating because ordinary Americans hate the oppressive laws and regulations that the Democrats impose in order to control you. They can only win by cheating, so they flood the country with illegals so as to replace American voters with illegals who know nothing about our system, care nothing about our system of government, and sell out to those who will pay them for their votes. That is, the Democrats, just like they did in Minneapolis. If I only had a time machine to bring back our forefathers forward to today, they would summarily declare the Democrats as traitors and hang them on the spot. The lines of demarcation have never been clearer nor more defined. Now, here is an evil incarnate over in Europe and heading for America. Think about this, and this was disgusting and nauseating. The Supreme Court of Finland, in a 3-2 vote, convicted Christian Democrat member of Parliament Räsänen on Thursday of agitation against the population group over a 20-year-old publication critical of homosexuality. On Thursday, the court voted to convict Räsänen over the 20-year-old publication, which she titled Male and Female, He Created Them. Homosexual relationships challenge the Christian concept of humanity. The Luther Foundation was also convicted, which republished the content over the internet in 2019. And the Finland Supreme Court noted that the member of parliament was charged with 2 counts over the publication derogatory towards homosexuals on the basis of their sexual orientation. In the text, Räsänen had, among other things, noted that homosexuality is an aberration of psychosexual development and described homosexuality as sexual deviation. In the text, Räsänen had, among other things, noted that homosexuality is an aberration of psychosexual development and described homosexuality as sexual deviation. So the Finnish top court cited in their statement and judgment. So now white liberals are trying to make the Bible illegal and will penalize anyone quoting from it. Canada is outlawing it too. I, for one, pray Psalm 109 curse on these people, but would go even further. Inasmuch as most of Europe is going this way and consumed with atheism and becoming culturally incompatible with the United States, why should we defend them with our nuclear umbrella? I agree with Trump. Why do we need to be a member of NATO? They do nothing for us, and as we have seen in the Iranian conflict, Spain will not even allow us to use their airspace. And it's not just them. Others have refused it too. It's time for judgment to fall upon these reprobates. Leave them to the wolves. We cannot coexist with the evil incarnate, so we need to abandon them to their own devices. Do not pollute yourselves with the types we are seeing emerge in Europe. We don't need them. We need to get out of God's way to implement judgment and the natural consequences of their evil choices. Just as God passed judgment on Israel in the Old Testament with allowing them to be conquered by the Babylonians and then Rome, perhaps Islam is God's way today of passing judgment upon Europe. And I, for one, say, get out of God's way and let these reprobates in Europe suffer under the harsh yoke of Islam. Okay, I went long today, and there is so much news hitting at once as the forces of the left and simply pure evil are collectively amassing to stop the trend towards normalcy that Trump has begun. So with that, until next time, I'm Jack Richardson for Jack's Corner.